We know that there are various types of institutions in higher education. For example, we have four-year colleges and universities, and we also have two-year colleges. But there are also institutions like HBCUs and tribal colleges. So to talk more about tribal colleges, I have today Dr. Heather Schotten, who is an assistant professor in the Native American Studies program here at the University of Oklahoma. And then she's also the former president of the National Indian Education Association. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So let's start by talking a little bit about the history of tribal colleges. What are some of the key points about how tribal colleges came to be, and then we'll move into a conversation about the present landscape of tribal colleges.
In the 60s and 70s, just in terms of the landscape and the climate for tribes and policies around Native people, we saw a lot of changes in federal policy and a lot of movements that were happening during that time. During the 60s, we saw a real turn towards self-determination for tribes. Mm-hmm. We see that in federal policy, and we see that through activist activity, through the American Indian movement. We see that in a number of areas that involve Native people. One of those areas is in education. So in 1968, in line with that move towards self-determination for tribes, meaning that tribes had gotten to a point where we had been in these policies that had really been more of a trust responsibility, a more paternalistic responsibility for the federal government dictating to tribes what they should do and how they should be. We'd also moved out of a period of termination where the federal government was trying to terminate their responsibility in the relationship between the federal government and tribes. We see the switch to self-determination where tribes are saying, we know what's best for us. We know how to govern ourselves. We know how to take care of our tribal citizens. We understand what's best for our people. Within that, we see this move in education with the establishment of the Navajo Community College, which is today Dene College. In 1968, the Navajo Community College was established, and it was the first tribal college. And it was really this movement in education, this movement towards tribal colleges, was a response to the lack of success for Native students in higher education. It was also about Native students not having access to higher education. So many students who were in geographically isolated areas, so geographically isolated reservation areas in particular, that might not have physical access to four-year institutions or even two-year institutions, to community colleges. So you're talking about people who the closest institution of higher education, whether it was a two-year or four-year institution, might have been 4 hours away. So we think about the rest of the country and just the physical access that we often have to institutions. If we think about the state of Oklahoma, how many institutions, whether they be community colleges or regional institutions, or state institutions, that most people have some immediate access geographically. But many Native students and tribal citizens didn't have that kind of access geographically. Also, Native students weren't faring well in higher education. Retention and graduation rates were really low. And tribes were feeling like mainstream institutions were just not meeting the needs of their students or their citizens. And so we had the establishment of tribal colleges and universities. So again, Navajo Community College in 1968 was the first tribal college that was established in the United States. And then there were a number of other tribes that followed suit and other tribal colleges that were established. And so we see this shift of self-determination for tribes and taking back control of education, because the history of education with tribes and with Native people and the federal government had really been a history of the federal government dictating and using education as a way to assimilate Native people. And so in 1978, there was a push for federal policy, and we had the Tribally Controlled Community Colleges Act that was signed into law in 1978, so about 9 or 10 years later after the first tribal college was established. And this provided for federal funding for these types of institutions.
So it was an opportunity to not only have ownership of the education, but ownership of meeting the needs of the people in the tribes as well.
Right. And really meeting the needs of their citizens, the students, but also the immediate needs of the tribe in that area,
Okay.
and providing the services that often those communities really do need.